A chance encounter. The high-rise buildings of the city loomed as the last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the bustling streets below. James Thornton, a prominent businessman known for his steely demeanor and meticulous control over every facet of his life, adjusted his custom-made tie as he stepped out of his office. Today had been another victorious day, closing yet another lucrative deal that would bolster his empire's standing in the financial world. However, despite the wealth and success he'd amassed over the years, a gnawing emptiness resided in the quiet corners of his mind, creeping out in moments when he was alone. His assistant, Clara, knocked softly on his office door. "Anything else you need, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, looking up from her tablet. "No, that will be all." "Thank you, Clara," he replied curtly, his gaze distant as he reviewed his day. Clara gave a brief nod and retreated, leaving him in the solitude of his corner office. James checked his watch. 7:52 p.m. The cleaning crew had already started making their rounds, the faint hum of vacuum cleaners drifting through the silent corridors. Normally, he would have called his driver and headed straight home, his mind already racing to plan tomorrow's tasks. But tonight, an unusual urge tugged at him. Instead of his usual route home, he felt compelled to take a walk through the nearby city park. James had seen the park from a distance many times, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd set foot on its winding paths. He hardly had time for leisurely strolls. There were always more important matters that required his attention. As he stepped outside, the crisp evening air hit him with a refreshing coolness. He walked briskly down the street, his polished shoes tapping a steady rhythm against the concrete. The park was a few blocks away, and as he approached, he was greeted by the sight of towering oak trees and well-manicured flower beds. The city's usual clamor softened, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the faint sound of water trickling from a nearby fountain. For a man accustomed to structured environments, the park's open spaces felt foreign yet oddly calming. He walked along the path, his gaze sweeping across the surroundings. A young couple sat on a bench, laughing softly as they shared a snack. Nearby, a father pushed his son on a swing, their laughter filling the air. James watched them for a moment, a strange pang of longing stirring in him. He quickly brushed it aside, focusing instead on the path ahead. As he walked deeper into the park, he noticed a small weathered plaque on a stone pillar by the path. Thornton Memorial Park, funded by Thornton Enterprises. He barely remembered the donation. It had been part of a PR campaign, another chance to bolster his company's image. But now, seeing his name engraved on the stone in a place so serene, he felt a pang of something unidentifiable. The park was nearly empty as night settled in, the streetlights casting soft, warm pools of light along the pathways. He was just about to turn back when he caught sight of a small figure huddled on a bench. It was odd. Who would be here at this hour, especially someone so small? James approached, his footsteps muffled by the soft earth. As he drew closer, he realized it was a young boy, no older than 10, curled up on the bench. The boy's face was partially hidden by the hood of a tattered sweatshirt, and a dim light from a phone illuminated his surroundings just enough for James to see the edge of a book balanced on his lap. James cleared his throat, his voice coming out sharper than intended. "What are you doing out here?" The boy jolted, nearly dropping his book. Wide, dark eyes looked up at James, filled with a mixture of surprise and caution. James noted the weary expression on the boy's face, the hollowness in his cheeks, the way he clutched the book to his chest as if it were a shield. I was just reading," the boy stammered, glancing away as if expecting to be scolded. James softened his tone, sensing the boy's fear. "It's late. Where are your parents?" The boy looked down, shifting uncomfortably. "There, not here," he said softly, almost a whisper. There was a silence between them as the boy kept his gaze fixed on the ground, clearly unwilling to divulge more. A flicker of empathy stirred within James, surprising him. He knew the look in the boy's eyes. He'd seen it before, years ago, In the mirror, despite the years of luxury and accomplishment, James had not forgotten his own challenging childhood. Memories of nights spent alone, struggling to survive, flashed briefly in his mind. He brushed them aside, focusing instead on the boy in front of him. "What's your name?" he asked, hoping to keep the conversation going without pressuring the boy. "Elijah," the boy replied, hugging his book closer. "All right, Elijah. It's late, and you shouldn't be out here alone. Do you live nearby?" The boy hesitated before shaking his head. "No, I don't have anywhere to go." James felt a pang of sadness, mixed with frustration at a world where children like Elijah slipped through the cracks. He wasn't used to feeling this way. His life was a fortress built on control, predictability, and precision. But this boy's plight was something he couldn't ignore. "You're sleeping here, in the park?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Elijah nodded, his gaze never meeting James. "It's quiet here. And sometimes people leave food by the trash cans. It's better than some other places." The answer struck James hard. He swallowed, his usual stoicism faltering as he looked at this boy, alone in a world that had seemingly abandoned him. He wanted to ask more questions, but he sensed Elijah's reluctance, the way he held himself tightly, as if revealing too much would make him vulnerable. James took a deep breath, unsure of what had compelled him to do what he was about to do. "Elijah," he began, keeping his tone gentle, "I don't know what's brought you here, but it's too dangerous for you to stay out here every night. Would you be willing to come with me? I have a place where you can stay, and I can help you get some food." The boy looked at him, surprise and suspicion flaring in his eyes. "Why?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of hope and wariness. "Why would you help me?" James paused, considering the question. He could give a rehearsed answer, something polite and distant, but he felt compelled to be honest. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he replied quietly. "And sometimes a little help can make a big difference." Elijah hesitated, looking at James with searching eyes. After a long moment, he gave a small nod, the hint of a fragile trust forming. James offered a reassuring smile, leading the boy out of the park, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. As they walked together through the city streets, James felt an unexpected warmth fill the hollow space that had gnawed at him for so long. An unexpected bond. The quiet drive through the city felt like a surreal experience for Elijah, who sat tensely in the backseat of James's car, gripping his tattered book as if it were a lifeline. He had rarely, if ever, been inside a vehicle as luxurious as this one, and the plush leather seats felt strange against his worn clothes. James sat in the front, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights as the cityscape rolled by outside the tinted windows. James glanced back at Elijah occasionally, noting the boy's tense posture and wary gaze. It struck him just how deeply this child's reality differed from his own, and he felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest, a yearning to do something meaningful for someone other than himself. They soon arrived at James's penthouse, an elegant building with marble floors and gilded chandeliers. Elijah's eyes widened as they entered the lobby, his gaze darting to the polished floors, the shimmering crystal lights, and the opulence of it all. They stepped into the elevator, and James pressed the button for the top floor. Elijah looked down, clutching his book tighter, and James noticed the wear and tear on the cover. It looked like an old engineering manual, something that seemed far too advanced for a child his age. Curiosity got the better of him. "What's that book you've got there, Elijah?" he asked, his voice gentle. Elijah hesitated, then glanced down at the book with a faint smile. It's about circuits and electronics. I found it in a library sale, and they let me take it for free because it was so old. I like learning about how things work." His voice softened as he spoke, and a spark of enthusiasm flashed in his eyes. "I don't understand everything, but I want to. Someday." James felt a pang of admiration. Despite everything this child had endured, he had a spark, a passion that could carry him far if given the chance. The elevator doors opened, and James led Elijah into his penthouse. The vast space, with its high ceilings, glass walls, and meticulously curated furniture, was a stark contrast to anything Elijah had ever known. "Make yourself comfortable," James said, gesturing to the couch. Elijah perched on the edge of the seat, looking uncertain, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on the framed artwork and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city lights twinkling against the night sky. After a moment, James returned with a tray of sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of water. Elijah's eyes widened as he saw the food, and he mumbled a quiet thank you before he began eating with a polite restraint that surprised James. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, as if unsure when his next meal would come. As Elijah ate, James studied him quietly, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He was beginning to understand just how fragile this boy's situation was. Elijah's small frame was a testament to years of scarcity, his thin clothes suggesting that warmth and comfort had been rare luxuries. The quiet way he observed everything around him, never fully relaxing, told James of the caution that came from a life lived without security. "Do you have any family?" James asked gently, sensing that he might finally get a few answers. Elijah hesitated, looking down at his plate, his fingers nervously toying with the crust of his sandwich. "My mom. She passed away a year ago," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "After that, I didn't have anywhere to go. My dad, he left a long time ago, before I can even remember." James felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm so sorry, Elijah," he said, his voice sincere. He couldn't imagine the pain and loneliness this child must have felt, forced to navigate a world that had offered him so little support. He'd had a difficult childhood himself, but nothing compared to what Elijah had faced. "How have you managed all this time?" Elijah shrugged, his gaze distant. I learned how to survive. I found a couple of places I could stay for a night here and there, like shelters or abandoned buildings, but they're not safe. So I started staying in the park. It's quiet, and people don't notice me as much there." James clenched his fists, anger and sadness welling up inside him. He couldn't fathom the idea of a child left to fend for himself, navigating dangers and hardships that no child should have to endure. A part of him wondered how many other kids like Elijah were out there, unseen and forgotten. After a few moments, James broke the silence. "Elijah, you don't have to go back to the park," he said firmly. "I know you don't know me well, and maybe it feels strange, but I want to help. You can stay here, at least for tonight, and we can figure out something more permanent tomorrow." Elijah looked at James, surprise evident in his eyes. You'd let me stay here?" he asked, disbelief lacing his words. "Yes," James replied without hesitation. "I want to help, Elijah. And you don't have to worry. I know things might feel uncertain right now, but we'll figure it out together. You're not alone anymore." Elijah's eyes filled with tears, and he quickly looked away, embarrassed. He hadn't cried since his mother's death, bottling up his emotions in order to stay strong. But James's words, simple yet filled with genuine care, cracked the walls he had built around his heart. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," Elijah whispered, barely audible, but James heard it. He gave a reassuring nod, his own emotions stirring as he saw the vulnerability in the boy's eyes. James showed Elijah to the guest room, a spacious and warmly decorated space with a plush bed, soft lighting, and a view of the city lights. Elijah looked around in awe, as if he had stepped into another world. The bed looked almost too perfect to touch, and he approached it hesitantly, as though afraid it might vanish if he got too close. "Go ahead," James said with a gentle smile. "It's all yours for tonight." Elijah carefully sat on the edge of the bed, then leaned back slightly, feeling the softness beneath him. For the first time in what felt like forever, He could truly relax, the weight of constant worry lifting ever so slightly. James left him to settle in, giving him some privacy to adjust to this new environment. That night, Elijah lay in the comfort of clean sheets, staring at the ceiling, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. He couldn't remember the last time he had slept in a real bed. It felt surreal, and he struggled to believe it was all real. But as he drifted off to sleep, he realized that for the first time in years, he felt safe. The next morning, James found himself making breakfast in the kitchen, something he hadn't done in years. Normally, his housekeeper handled all his meals, but today felt different. He wanted to make something simple yet hearty, something that might show Elijah that he genuinely cared. He prepared scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction with each step. When Elijah came into the kitchen, his hair tousled and his eyes still drowsy from sleep, he looked at the food in amazement. Did you make all this?" he asked, still not quite used to the kindness. James smiled, nodding as he gestured to the table. "Yes, I did. Help yourself. I figured you could use a good meal to start the day." Elijah hesitated, but the delicious smell and the growling in his stomach convinced him to sit down. As he ate, James took a seat across from him, watching with quiet contentment. This boy, with his resilience and quiet determination, had unknowingly rekindled something in him, a part of himself he thought had been lost to years of business deals and profit margins. After they finished breakfast, James brought up the idea of getting Elijah some new clothes and supplies. "We'll stop by a few stores and pick up what you need," he said. "And maybe later we can look into some schooling options, if that's something you'd like." Elijah looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. You mean I could go to school again?" "Yes," James replied gently. "If you want to. You're a bright kid, Elijah. I have no doubt you'd do well." The boy's face lit up with a tentative smile, a glimpse of the child he'd been before life's hardships had stolen his innocence. James felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He realized that helping Elijah wasn't just about the boy. It was about himself, too. In Elijah's journey, James saw the chance to reclaim a part of himself he'd lost, a chance to make a meaningful difference, not through wealth or power, but through kindness and compassion. As they left the penthouse that morning, James felt a renewed sense of hope, and for the first time in years, he saw a future that wasn't defined solely by success and wealth. He felt a purpose beyond business deals and corporate ambitions, a chance to forge a bond that would change both their lives forever. New beginnings. As James and Elijah walked through the bustling city streets, side by side, it felt to both like they were stepping into a new chapter of their lives. Elijah, though still cautious, began to open up as he observed the world around him with wide-eyed curiosity. And James, normally glued to his phone or preoccupied with the countless details of his business empire, found himself taking in his surroundings in a way he hadn't done in years. He was rediscovering the city not through the lens of a millionaire, but through the innocent wonder of a child who had rarely seen this side of life. Their first stop was a department store. As they entered, Elijah's eyes grew even wider. He had never been to a place like this, where the shelves overflowed with neatly folded clothes, and everything looked so pristine. James guided him toward the kids section, pulling out shirts, pants, and jackets in different sizes. "What kind of clothes do you like?" James asked, his tone gentle. He wanted Elijah to feel comfortable, to realize that he now had the power to make choices, something he might not have had in a long time. Elijah looked at him, uncertainty flickering in his gaze. I don't know. Just something warm, I guess," he murmured, glancing at a rack of jackets with a mixture of longing and hesitation. James picked out a navy blue jacket, holding it up. "How about this one? It looks warm and durable, good for the colder months." Elijah nodded, and James saw a small smile start to form on his face. As they continued picking out clothes, James noticed how Elijah's guarded demeanor slowly began to melt. The boy even started to offer his own opinions, pointing out a red hoodie he liked, and shyly selecting a pair of sturdy jeans. James encouraged every small choice, feeling a quiet satisfaction in seeing Elijah's confidence build, one piece of clothing at a time. Next, they moved on to essentials like shoes, socks, and a warm scarf. James marveled at how simple these items seemed to him, yet to Elijah, they were treasures, a new beginning wrapped in soft fabric and sturdy soles. As they approached the cashier, Elijah hesitated, tugging on James's sleeve. This is a lot," Elijah whispered, looking up at him. "Are you sure it's okay?" James placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's absolutely okay, Elijah. You deserve this, and so much more." After finishing up at the department store, James decided to take Elijah to a bookstore, thinking back to the battered engineering book the boy had clung to the night before. The store was cozy, filled with the comforting scent of old paper and the quiet murmur of patrons flipping through pages. Elijah's face lit up as they walked in, his eyes immediately darting to the shelves, filled with books on science, mechanics, and electronics. James watched with quiet amusement as Elijah gravitated toward a section on beginners' engineering and circuitry. The boy picked up a book, running his fingers over the cover as if it were a precious artifact. James came up beside him, glancing at the book. "Would you like to get it?" he asked, knowing the answer already. Elijah looked at him, an expression of disbelief and hope mingling on his face. "Really? I mean, that would be amazing," he said, his voice tinged with awe. James nodded, adding the book to their growing stack. "And pick out a couple more if you'd like. I think you have a knack for this sort of thing, Elijah. It's clear you've got a sharp mind." Elijah's cheeks flushed with pride, and he began scanning the shelves with more confidence, selecting books on basic electronics, robotics, and even a beginner's guide to programming. For the first time in his life, he had the chance to explore his interests freely, without worrying about the next meal or where he would sleep that night. And James, standing by his side, felt an unexpected joy in watching the boy find something that made him feel valued and hopeful. Once they'd purchased the books, they stopped for lunch at a small cafe nearby. James watched as Elijah slowly savored his sandwich, his mind already half absorbed in one of the books he'd chosen. It was a simple scene, yet something about it touched James deeply. Elijah's presence was stirring something inside him, reminding him of the person he used to be, the man he had set aside in his relentless pursuit of wealth and power. "Elijah," James said, breaking the comfortable silence, "have you thought about what you'd like to do in the future?" The boy looked up, startled by the question. He considered it, his gaze drifting out the cafe window. I want to understand how things work. Like everything. I think I'd like to make things, like machines or robots. Maybe even things that could help people." James smiled, feeling a strange sense of pride for this boy he'd only just met. "I think you'd be brilliant at that," he said warmly. "And I'll help you get there, if you want. Whatever resources you need, I'll make sure you have them." Elijah's eyes shone, a rare vulnerability in his gaze. "No one's ever told me that before," he said softly, his voice trembling with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I always thought I'd just be on my own." James reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Elijah's. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said gently. "I'll be here, as long as you need me." As the afternoon wore on, they returned to the penthouse, both feeling a deep sense of satisfaction from the day's adventures. Back home, James showed Elijah how to use the spare study as his own space, a place where he could read, study, and explore his interests. Elijah took it all in, visibly moved, as though he couldn't believe this place could be his. Days turned into weeks, and Elijah settled into his new life with James's guidance. Every day, James saw him blossom a little more. Elijah was enrolled in school, and though he was initially nervous, he soon adapted, fueled by his natural curiosity and his love for learning. In the evenings, he'd sit with his new books, diving into the world of circuits and codes, his mind ablaze with ideas. Sometimes he'd share these ideas with James, who would listen intently, genuinely interested in the boy's ambitions. James, too, found himself changing in unexpected ways. He became more mindful, more attuned to the simple joys of life he'd neglected for so long. Every evening, he and Elijah shared dinner together, discussing their day and sharing stories. James felt his guarded heart opening, his once rigid schedule becoming flexible, infused with purpose beyond financial success. One night, after dinner, James noticed Elijah sitting by the window, gazing out at the city lights. The boy's usual spark seemed dimmed, his expression contemplative. "What's on your mind, Elijah?" James asked, coming to sit beside him. Elijah sighed, his gaze fixed on the glittering skyline. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if this is all real. Like, maybe one day I'll wake up and it'll all be gone. Like it was just a dream." James felt a pang of sadness, understanding the depth of Elijah's fears. He placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "I understand, Elijah, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, and this isn't going to disappear. You have a home here, and you're part of my life now. You don't have to worry about losing it." Elijah looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't think I could ever say it enough. You changed everything for me." James's chest tightened, emotion welling up within him. "And you've changed everything for me too," he replied, his voice soft. He hadn't expected that offering kindness to someone else could fill the emptiness he'd felt for so long. Elijah had become more than just a responsibility or a project. He was family. As the weeks continued, Elijah's confidence grew, his resilience shining through. He flourished academically, impressing his teachers and even his classmates. James attended every school event, watching with pride as Elijah presented projects and shared his knowledge with others. James began to see the world differently, his perspective widened by the boy's presence. He realized that wealth and success weren't nearly as fulfilling as he had once thought. Watching Elijah grow and thrive brought him a satisfaction that no business deal could replicate. One evening, after a long day of work, James found Elijah waiting for him in the study. Elijah had been tinkering with a small circuit board, a focused determination in his eyes. "Look," Elijah said, his voice brimming with excitement as he held up a small handmade device. "I made this. It's a simple sensor that detects movement and lights up. It's not perfect, but I think it works." James examined the device, awe and admiration in his gaze. "Elijah, this is incredible. You did this all on your own." Elijah nodded, a proud smile lighting up his face. "Yeah, I just followed the instructions in the book and tried my best." James felt a swell of pride, a warmth that seemed to fill every corner of his heart. In that moment, he knew that this journey with Elijah was the most important thing he'd ever done. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing with certainty. Elijah had forever changed him, and in guiding this boy toward his dreams, he had finally found the purpose he'd been searching for all along. Rising hopes, lingering shadows. Months passed, and Elijah's life with James unfolded like a flower blooming under the warmth of sunlight. What had once been unimaginable to Elijah, stability, safety, and companionship, became the foundation of his days. He excelled in school, thriving in the supportive environment James had provided, and his once shy demeanor gave way to a quiet but growing confidence. James watched this transformation with immense pride, feeling as though he were watching a son achieve milestones he had once thought beyond reach. But alongside Elijah's growth, James faced his own transformation. He no longer found himself preoccupied with endless business calls and towering stacks of paperwork. Instead, he rearranged his schedule to be home for dinner every night, to help Elijah with his schoolwork, and to offer guidance on the projects the boy poured his heart into. His office colleagues noticed the change, sensing a new depth in their once hard-nosed boss. While he was still as committed as ever to his work, his motivations seemed to have shifted, and those closest to him saw a gentler, more compassionate side emerging. Yet, amid these joyful developments, James sensed a shadow lingering in Elijah. There were moments when the boy seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant as though recalling something painful. And while he was growing more open, there were still parts of his past he hadn't shared. James respected Elijah's silence, but he couldn't help but worry. He knew the scars of Elijah's previous life weren't easily erased. One evening, as they sat together in the study, James decided to gently probe, sensing it was time to understand more about the experiences that had shaped this remarkable young boy. "Elijah," James began, choosing his words carefully, "you know you can talk to me about anything, right? I don't want to pry, but if there are things on your mind, things from before we met, I want you to know I'm here to listen." Elijah looked up from his book, a flash of surprise in his eyes. He was quiet for a moment, glancing down as he traced the edges of the pages with his finger. "It's hard to talk about," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes it feels like it's from another life." James nodded, waiting patiently. He didn't want to rush Elijah, but he hoped that sharing would help ease some of the weight the boy carried. Elijah took a deep breath, steadying himself. "After my mom passed, everything changed. She was all I had, and when she got sick, we didn't have enough money to keep up with the hospital bills. I tried to help her, even tried to do odd jobs here and there, but it wasn't enough. And then, one day, she was just gone." James's chest tightened, grief threading through his heart as he listened to Elijah's story. The pain in the boy's voice was palpable, and it reminded him of the isolation he himself had felt as a young man, clawing his way up from a similarly bleak past. But Elijah's journey had been even harder, and James couldn't imagine the sorrow this child had endured, navigating the world with no one by his side. "After that, I didn't know where to go," Elijah continued, his voice wavering slightly. "I was afraid people would try to put me somewhere I didn't want to be, so I just tried to blend in, to survive without being noticed. Sometimes people were kind, like letting me have leftover food, but mostly it was just me, alone." James struggled to maintain his composure, moved by the resilience it must have taken for Elijah to survive. He reached over, gently placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Elijah, I'm so sorry you went through that. No one should ever have to feel so alone, especially someone as young as you." Elijah looked up, his gaze softened with gratitude. "It's better now. Because of you, I never thought someone would want me around. I always thought I was just a burden." His voice cracked, and he looked away, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. James felt his own eyes mist, and he spoke with a quiet intensity. "Elijah, you are not a burden. You are a gift. You've brought more light and purpose into my life than I ever thought possible. If anything, I'm the one who's grateful to have you here." They sat in silence, the bond between them deepening in that shared moment of vulnerability. Elijah felt a sense of relief, as if sharing his past had lifted a weight from his shoulders. And for James, the conversation strengthened his resolve to give Elijah the future he deserved. In the weeks that followed, James threw himself into creating opportunities for Elijah's future. He reached out to contacts in education and technology, eager to provide resources that could nurture Elijah's interests. He introduced Elijah to an old friend, Margaret, a retired engineer who had spent her life working in robotics. Margaret, impressed by Elijah's intelligence and eagerness to learn, offered to tutor him a few evenings each week. Elijah took to the tutoring sessions with enthusiasm, soaking up every lesson Margaret shared. He would spend hours in the study afterward, experimenting with circuits and programming exercises, his mind alight with possibilities. Margaret marveled at his potential, often telling James that Elijah's brilliance was something rare, the kind of talent that could truly change the world if nurtured. As Elijah's skill grew, James started to consider long-term plans for him. He wanted to ensure Elijah would have access to the best education possible, a solid foundation that would support him through his teenage years and beyond. He looked into scholarships, specialized programs, and even private schools known for their STEM programs. His desire to give Elijah every advantage was unwavering. But one evening, just as they were about to discuss some of these future plans, a letter arrived. A plain, weathered envelope addressed to Elijah. He held it with trembling hands, his face paling as he recognized the handwriting. It was from a distant relative he hadn't seen since his mother's passing, a relative who had never shown any interest in his well-being. The letter brought with it a flood of conflicting emotions. Elijah read it in silence, his expression unreadable. James watched him carefully, unsure of how to offer comfort without prying. "What's in the letter, Elijah?" he finally asked, his tone gentle. Elijah looked up, biting his lip. "It's from my uncle. He says he heard I was living with someone now, and he wants to meet. He says he's sorry for everything, that he's changed." He paused, a note of doubt in his voice. "But he wasn't there when I needed him. He never came when I was alone." James's heart sank. He sensed the turmoil Elijah must be feeling, the fear and uncertainty stirred up by the sudden reappearance of a relative who had once abandoned him. He reached over, placing a reassuring hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to, Elijah," James said softly. "Family is more than just blood. It's about the people who care for you, who are there for you through the good and the bad. You have every right to decide what's best for you." Elijah nodded slowly, though James could see the confusion in his eyes. Part of him seemed to long for a connection to his past, a sense of belonging to his family roots, but another part of him, the part forged by hardship and solitude, was wary, afraid to trust too easily. In the days that followed, Elijah grew quiet, his usual brightness dimmed by the weight of his decision. He spent long hours in the study, often tinkering with his projects in silence. James gave him space, sensing that this was a journey Elijah needed to navigate on his own, but he made sure to remind the boy each day that he was loved, that he had a place in his life, no matter what. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Elijah finally spoke, breaking the silence that had lingered between them. "I don't think I want to see him," Elijah said, his voice steady but sad. I have a family here, with you, and I don't think he'll understand me the way you do." James felt a surge of relief and pride, realizing the strength it must have taken for Elijah to make that decision. He wrapped an arm around Elijah's shoulders, pulling him into a gentle embrace. "You have a family here, always," James said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I'll be here for you, no matter what." Elijah nodded, a faint smile breaking through his solemn expression. He leaned into James's embrace, feeling the warmth and safety he had once thought he would never know. As the night settled around them, James reflected on the journey they had both taken to reach this point. Elijah had chosen him, had chosen to embrace the love and support he was finally able to accept. And for James, this choice, this acceptance, was the most meaningful accomplishment of his life. In that moment, he knew with certainty that he would protect and support Elijah's dreams, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. He would be there for every challenge, every triumph, and every heartache, because that was what family meant, and he realized now that his heart had finally found its true purpose in guiding and supporting this remarkable young boy. As they sat together, a new chapter of their journey began, one of shared dreams, unwavering trust, and a bond that nothing could break. Building dreams together. The choice to stay with James instead of reconnecting with his estranged uncle marked a pivotal moment in Elijah's journey. His heart felt lighter, his spirit freed from the lingering fear of abandonment. The bond he shared with James became even stronger, forged in shared trust and mutual respect. For the first time in his young life, Elijah felt rooted, grounded in a place, and in a relationship that made him feel truly valued. And with this newfound stability, his ambitions blossomed. James, too, felt the shift in their dynamic. Elijah was no longer just a young boy he had rescued from the park. He had become a son in all but name. And with each passing day, James found himself even more committed to ensuring that Elijah had every opportunity to thrive. The cold, calculated businessman who had once been defined by balance sheets and board meetings was evolving into a man driven by compassion, mentorship, and a profound sense of purpose. One weekend, as they shared breakfast together, Elijah looked up from his plate, his eyes filled with an excited yet nervous spark. "James, I have an idea," he began, fidgeting with his fork. "I know it's kind of crazy, but I'd like to try building something. Something real, something useful." James set down his coffee mug, his attention fully captured. "What kind of something?" he asked, encouraging him. Elijah hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I want to build a prototype of a device I've been designing. It's like a sensor that could help people. Maybe it could detect movement or heat, kind of like an early warning system for safety. It could be used in places where people need protection, like in shelters or on the streets." James's heart swelled with pride. Elijah's idea wasn't just creative. It was compassionate, born out of his own experiences and driven by a genuine desire to help others. He saw a spark in Elijah's eyes, a spark he recognized from his own early days, though his ambition had been fueled by survival and success. Elijah's was fueled by empathy and a desire to make the world safer for people who had walked a path similar to his own. "That's a brilliant idea, Elijah," James said warmly. "And I think it's more than possible. We can get you the resources and materials you need to make it happen. I believe in you." Elijah's face broke into a smile, his nerves dissipating as his excitement took over. "Thank you, James. I didn't think it would be possible, but if you're willing to help." "Absolutely," James replied, feeling a rush of enthusiasm that mirrored Elijah's. "This is your project, Elijah, but I'll be here to support you every step of the way. We'll get you everything you need, and if you want, we can even set up a workspace here in the study where you can work on it." Over the next few weeks, James transformed a corner of the study into a mini laboratory for Elijah. They bought all the necessary materials: microcontrollers, sensors, wiring, soldering tools, and various electronic components. James's network of contacts proved invaluable, and he even reached out to some colleagues in tech who could offer advice on specific challenges Elijah might encounter. For Elijah, this was more than just a project. It was a chance to create something meaningful, something that would help others. Every evening after school, he would hurry to his workspace, diving into his plans with a level of focus and determination that astonished James. Diagrams and notes covered the walls, and a notebook full of calculations and sketches was never far from his reach. Elijah's mind was a whirl of creativity and innovation, and he took to the work with a dedication that spoke to his natural aptitude. Margaret, the retired engineer who would become something of a mentor to Elijah, came over regularly to offer guidance. She was amazed by the boy's talent and ingenuity. One evening, as she and James observed Elijah hard at work, she turned to James, her expression one of quiet awe. "He's truly exceptional, James," she said softly. "In all my years, I've rarely seen this kind of talent in someone so young. He has a gift that could take him far. I hope you know how special he is." James nodded, his gaze fixed on Elijah. "I do, and I want to make sure he has every opportunity to reach his potential. I see so much of myself in him, but he's got something I never had at his age. He has heart, compassion. He wants to use his abilities to help others. That's something rare." Margaret smiled, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "He's fortunate to have you, James. You're giving him something no amount of money could buy, a future filled with purpose." James felt a swell of gratitude, realizing how much his life had changed since Elijah had come into it. He had once believed his legacy would be defined by his wealth, by the empire he had built. But now, as he watched Elijah meticulously assemble this first prototype, he understood that his true legacy would be in guiding and supporting this remarkable young man. As Elijah's project neared completion, he faced setbacks that challenged his resilience. There were nights when the circuitry refused to work as planned, when sensors malfunctioned, or when programming bugs left him frustrated and exhausted. But each time he encountered a hurdle, he refused to give up. James would find him sitting in his chair, head bowed in frustration, and gently encourage him to take a break, reminding him that setbacks were just a part of the process. One night, after a particularly challenging day, Elijah slumped in his chair, his face a mixture of fatigue and disappointment. James sat beside him, offering a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Elijah, you're doing an amazing job," he said softly. "Every inventor, every creator, goes through this. The setbacks, the frustration. It's all part of the journey. But I see how determined you are, and I have no doubt that you'll find a way to make this work." Elijah looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thanks, James. I want this to succeed. Not just for me, but for the people out there who need something like this. People who might not have anyone to protect them." James's heart ached with pride and empathy. "And that's what makes this project so special, Elijah. It's not just about creating something, it's about making a difference. And that's something truly powerful." Encouraged by James's words, Elijah redoubled his efforts. Over the following weeks, he worked tirelessly, refining his design, testing each component with painstaking precision. And finally, one evening, as the city lights twinkled outside the penthouse windows, he completed his prototype, a compact sensor device that detected both motion and temperature changes, emitting a soft alarm when triggered. "James," Elijah called out, his voice filled with excitement. "I think it's ready. I think it actually works." James rushed into the study, his face lighting up with anticipation. Elijah demonstrated the device, carefully explaining each part and how it worked. As the sensor detected movement, it emitted a low, steady beep just as he had intended. James watched in awe, his heart swelling with pride. "Elijah, this is incredible. You've done it." Elijah beamed, his face glowing with accomplishment. "I never could have done this without you, James. Thank you for everything." James pulled him into a hug, unable to hold back his emotions. "You did this, Elijah. You had the vision, the determination, and the heart to make it happen. I just gave you a place to grow. I am so proud of you." The successful completion of Elijah's prototype marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Word of his invention began to spread, thanks to James's connections and Margaret's enthusiasm. Soon, he was invited to present his project at a local innovation fair, where young inventors showcased their work. Elijah was nervous at first, but with James by his side, he found the courage to share his creation with the world. On the day of the fair, James watched from the audience, his heart pounding with pride as Elijah took the stage. The boy spoke with a quiet confidence, explaining his design and the inspiration behind it. He spoke of his desire to help people, to provide safety and security for those who might not have it. His story touched everyone in the room, and by the end of his presentation, the audience erupted into applause. As Elijah stepped off the stage, he spotted James waiting for him, a proud smile on his face. They embraced, and James whispered, "You did it, Elijah. You made a difference today." Elijah smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, James. You showed me that I was worth something, that I could make a difference." They left the fair that day with a sense of accomplishment and hope for the future. Elijah's project caught the attention of several tech companies, and James received inquiries from foundations interested in funding young inventors like him. The possibilities for Elijah's future seemed limitless, and both of them knew that this was only the beginning. Later that night, as they sat together in the study, Elijah looked up at James, a question lingering in his gaze. "James, do you ever think about what your legacy will be?" James paused, considering the question. "I used to think it would be my business, my wealth," he said slowly. "But now, I think my legacy will be in the lives I touched. In you, Elijah. Helping you reach your potential. That's worth more than anything I could ever build or buy." Elijah smiled, feeling a sense of peace. "I hope someday I can do the same. Help someone the way you helped me." James placed a hand on his shoulder, pride and love shining in his eyes. "You already have, Elijah. You already have." As they sat together, the weight of all they had built and all that lay ahead settled around them. Together, they had created a bond stronger than blood, a legacy rooted in love, resilience, and the unwavering belief in each other's potential. And they knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. A legacy of love and vision. Years passed, and Elijah grew into a remarkable young man, with James by his side every step of the way. What began as an act of kindness, an unexpected moment of compassion on a quiet evening in the park, had blossomed into a relationship that redefined both their lives. Elijah was no longer the shy, wary boy who had clung to a worn book on circuitry. He was now a confident young inventor with a vision and a drive that inspired everyone who met him. Elijah's first invention, the early warning sensor he had designed with such care and dedication, evolved over time. With James's support, he developed new prototypes, refining the device until it was ready for real-world application. Through James's connections, Elijah's project received funding from an organization dedicated to public safety and innovation, and before long, his device was being implemented in shelters and community centers across the city. The technology that had once been a mere dream was now a reality, helping to keep countless people safe. James felt an indescribable pride watching Elijah's growth. The boy he had once guided through his first steps of invention was now well on his way to changing the world. Elijah's sensor, which they affectionately named the Guardian, became known as a vital tool for safety in vulnerable communities. The recognition brought Elijah opportunities to speak at conferences, collaborate with other innovators, and even secure a scholarship to one of the nation's top universities for engineering and technology. But despite the acclaim, Elijah remained grounded. He always returned to the penthouse, to the home he shared with James, where the bond between them had only strengthened over the years. Elijah knew that his achievements were not his alone. They were the product of love, support, and the unwavering belief James had in him. And as much as James had given Elijah a family, Elijah had done the same for him, filling a void James had long believed would remain empty. On the night before Elijah was set to leave for university, the two of them shared a quiet dinner together. The penthouse felt strangely empty, filled with a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. Both of them knew this was a milestone, a moment that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. After dinner, they moved to the study, where they had shared countless hours of laughter, learning, and hard work. The walls were lined with Elijah's early drawings, schematics, and notes, preserved like a living testament to his journey. James poured them each a glass of sparkling cider, wanting to commemorate the evening in a way that felt celebratory yet personal. "To you, Elijah," James said, raising his glass. "To the remarkable man you've become, and to the extraordinary future that awaits you." Elijah smiled, clinking his glass with James's, though his expression held a tinge of sadness. "Thank you, James, for everything. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." James shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "I may have given you a place to grow, but everything you've accomplished, you did that. You had the vision, the drive, and the heart. I'm just proud to have been part of the journey." They drank in silence for a moment, savoring the memories that filled the room. Then Elijah looked around, his eyes lingering on the walls. the bookshelves, the desk where he had built his first prototype. "Do you remember the night you found me in the park?" Elijah asked quietly, a faint smile on his lips. James nodded, his mind drifting back to that fateful evening. "I do. I almost walked right past you. But something made me stop. Something pulled me toward you." Elijah's gaze softened. "I think about that night a lot. I remember feeling so alone, like no one in the world could see me. But you did. You saw me. And that changed everything." James felt a lump in his throat, realizing the depth of what Elijah was saying. He had saved Elijah that night, but in truth, Elijah had saved him too. He had brought light into a life that had become shadowed by ambition, solitude, and unspoken pain. Together, they had built a family from the foundation of that chance encounter, a family bound not by blood, but by love and understanding. After a few moments, Elijah set his glass down and walked over to his workspace, opening a drawer to reveal a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. He carried it over to James, holding it out with a quiet reverence. "This is for you," Elijah said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's something I've been working on for a while. A way to say thank you." Curious, James took the box, opening it to reveal a sleek, compact device nestled in soft velvet. It was similar to Elijah's original sensor, but more refined, with a polished metal casing and an elegant simplicity. James ran his fingers over it, admiring the craftsmanship. "It's called the Beacon," Elijah explained, a touch of pride in his voice. "It's designed for personal safety, but it has a unique feature. I programmed it to send a signal directly to my phone if it's ever activated. It's a way for me to stay connected to you, no matter where I am." James looked up, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Elijah, this is incredible. Thank you. I'll keep it with me always." Elijah smiled, visibly relieved. "I know it's not much, but I wanted you to have something from me. Something that reminds you that I'll always be here, just like you were always there for me." They sat together in silence, the weight of their shared journey settling around them. Both of them knew that Elijah's departure was a step they had prepared for, but it didn't make the parting any easier. Yet there was a comfort in knowing that their connection would endure, that the love they shared was a bond that would stretch across any distance. The next morning, James accompanied Elijah to the airport, helping him check in his bags and waiting with him until the boarding announcement filled the terminal. They shared a final embrace, both of them fighting back tears. "Go out there and make your dreams come true, Elijah," James said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You have everything you need. And remember, this will always be your home." Elijah hugged him tightly, feeling a mixture of excitement and sadness. "I'll come back, James. I promise. This isn't goodbye." As he watched Elijah walk toward the gate, James felt a profound sense of pride, mingled with a bittersweet ache. He knew that letting go was part of the journey, but it didn't lessen the weight of the moment. He returned to the penthouse that evening, finding the space both familiar and strangely empty without Elijah's presence. In the weeks that followed, James adjusted to life without Elijah, though he remained a constant presence through texts, calls, and video chats. Elijah shared stories of his classes, his new friends, and the projects he was working on, his voice filled with excitement and purpose. James cherished these conversations, feeling as though he were experiencing each milestone alongside him. Then, one crisp autumn evening, James received an invitation he hadn't expected, a formal announcement for the launch of Elijah's latest project, a venture he had developed in collaboration with his university and a leading tech company. The project was a public safety initiative, expanding on the technology of the Guardian to create a network of devices designed to improve safety in vulnerable communities. The device's potential was groundbreaking, and the launch event was expected to draw attention from industry leaders, investors, and the media. James attended the event with a sense of pride and anticipation. As he entered the auditorium, he saw familiar faces from the tech world, all of them buzzing with excitement. But it wasn't until Elijah took the stage that the full impact of the moment hit him. Elijah stood there, confident and poised, a young man on the brink of changing the world, and James realized with awe just how far he had come. Elijah began his presentation, speaking with a conviction that left the audience captivated. He shared the story of the Guardian, explaining how the device had been inspired by his own experiences and driven by his desire to protect those who were often overlooked. He spoke of James, too, acknowledging the man who had given him a second chance, who had believed in him when no one else had. "This project," Elijah said, his voice steady and filled with emotion, "isn't just about technology. It's about seeing people, about offering protection and dignity to those who need it most. And none of this would have been possible without James Thornton, the man who taught me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued." James felt tears pricking his eyes, overwhelmed by the gratitude and pride that filled him. In that moment, he understood that his legacy was not in wealth or power. It was in Elijah, in the life he had helped nurture, in the dreams he had helped make possible. After the presentation, Elijah found James in the crowd, and they embraced, both of them moved by the significance of the evening. "You did it, Elijah," James said, his voice thick with pride. "You've created something incredible, something that will change lives. I couldn't be prouder." Elijah smiled, his eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you, James. You showed me the way." As they left the auditorium together, James felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He had built an empire, achieved financial success beyond his wildest dreams, but none of it compared to the joy of seeing Elijah fulfill this potential. The young boy he had once found in the park had grown into a visionary, a force for change, and James knew that his own life had been forever transformed by their journey together. Together, they had built a legacy of love, vision, and resilience, a legacy that would ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring hope for generations to come. And as they walked into the night, side by side, James knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would live on in the hearts of all those they had inspired. A legacy passed on. The launch of Elijah's safety initiative had been a resounding success, capturing the attention of the media, industry leaders, and the public alike. Elijah's story of resilience, innovation, and compassion struck a chord with everyone who heard it. But beyond the public acclaim and professional milestones, Elijah's greatest fulfillment came from knowing that his work was making a tangible difference in the lives of those who, like him, had once felt invisible. The years continued to pass, and Elijah's career flourished. He completed his university education with honors and went on to establish his own nonprofit organization, called Visionary Roots, dedicated to empowering underprivileged youth through education in technology, engineering, and public safety. His foundation built partnerships with schools, shelters, and community centers, offering workshops and scholarships to young people who showed a spark of interest in engineering or technology. For Elijah, each of these connections was personal. He saw his younger self in the eyes of these children, who had dreams but no clear path forward, and he was determined to be the mentor and guide for them that James had been for him. James, now in his 60s, watched Elijah's journey with a deep and abiding pride. He continued to play a role in the Visionary Roots Foundation, serving as an advisor and often visiting the workshops to speak to the students about resilience, perseverance, and the power of mentorship. He was especially touched to see how much Elijah had internalized the values of compassion, integrity, and responsibility that they had nurtured together over the years. One evening, after a day spent at a Visionary Roots event, James and Elijah returned to the penthouse. The city lights twinkled against the darkened sky, and as they sat together in the study, a sense of nostalgia filled the air. The study hadn't changed much since Elijah's teenage years. It was still decorated with his early schematics, framed blueprints, and a few of his awards. For both of them, this room represented the beginning of everything. The dreams born in those quiet nights, the laughter, and the challenges they had faced together. They shared a comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping tea as they took in the memories that surrounded them. Elijah broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "James," he began, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About legacy, about the future. You know, when I first started Visionary Roots, I thought it was just about helping kids like me. But now, I want it to be more than that. I want it to be something that lives on, something that keeps making a difference long after we're gone." James nodded, understanding the weight of what Elijah was saying. "It already is, Elijah. What you've built is remarkable, and you've changed so many lives. But legacies, true legacies, are built over a lifetime, in ways we can't always predict. Sometimes they're in the small acts, the everyday kindnesses that ripple outward. What you're creating is going to last. I have no doubt about that." Elijah leaned back, a soft smile on his face. "You're right. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for those small acts. The night you stopped in the park, the first time you believed in me, the countless hours you spent mentoring me. I want to pass that on, to show these kids that there's someone who believes in them too." As they spoke, an idea began to take shape between them, a vision that would combine their shared values and the journey they have taken together. They decided to launch an initiative within Visionary Roots called the Beacon Project, in honor of the device Elijah had once gifted James, a symbol of connection and safety. The Beacon Project would focus on providing mentorship programs for youth who had experienced homelessness or displacement, offering them not only technical skills, but also emotional support and guidance, connecting them with mentors who could help them navigate the challenges of life. The Beacon Project grew rapidly, and Elijah was heartened by the response from the community. James, too, was moved by the outpouring of support from volunteers and donors, many of whom had been inspired by Elijah's story. They set up beacon centers in several major cities, each equipped with technology labs, classrooms, and counseling services, creating spaces where young people could learn, grow, and dream freely. As the Beacon Project gained momentum, Elijah and James spent even more time traveling together, meeting the youth who came through the program. They listened to the stories of the students, some of whom had faced hardships that mirrored Elijah's own past, and they marveled at the resilience and determination each of them showed. One of these students was a young girl named Maya. She was 15, quiet and reserved, with a spark of curiosity in her eyes that reminded James of Elijah's first days in the penthouse study. Maya had a gift for mechanical engineering, and though she was hesitant at first, she soon opened up to Elijah, inspired by his own journey from homelessness to success. Elijah took her under his wing, guiding her through her first robotics project. Watching her progress was a powerful experience for both him and James, and they saw in her the beginning of a journey similar to Elijah's, a journey shaped by resilience, mentorship, and a newfound hope for the future. It was in moments like these that Elijah felt his purpose most strongly, knowing that he was paying forward the gift of mentorship and love that had changed his own life. As the years continued, Visionary Roots and the Beacon Project expanded internationally, reaching communities in need across the globe. Elijah's name became known in circles far beyond his field, and he was often invited to speak at conferences, universities, and global forums, sharing his story and advocating for education and opportunity for all. He spoke with a humility that left audiences inspired, always crediting James for the foundation that had allowed him to succeed. James, now older and more reflective, watched with a quiet satisfaction. He continued to attend Elijah's events and meetings when he could, but he was also content knowing that Elijah was fully capable of leading their shared vision forward. His heart swelled with pride every time he saw Elijah step onto a stage, knowing that his legacy was safe in the hands of this extraordinary young man. One evening, after an event celebrating Visionary Roots' 10th anniversary, James and Elijah returned to the penthouse. They sat together in the study, once again surrounded by the memories and the symbols of their shared journey. James turned to Elijah, a contemplative look in his eyes. "Elijah," he began softly, "I want you to know that, for me, being part of your journey has been the greatest privilege of my life. I never thought I'd be a father, and yet, you've been more of a son to me than I ever could have imagined." Elijah smiled, emotion welling up in his eyes. "You are my father, James, in every way that matters. You gave me a home, a life, and the courage to dream. Everything I am is because of you." James reached out, pulling Elijah into a heartfelt embrace, a sense of peace settling over him. "And everything you are, Elijah, is a testament to the strength and kindness that was already within you. You've given me a life filled with purpose, and for that, I will always be grateful." They sat together in silence, the weight of their journey resting between them. In that moment, James felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that his life's work, his true legacy, was secure in the man Elijah had become. Over the next few years, Elijah continued to lead Visionary Roots and the Beacon Project, expanding their reach and impact. He also became a mentor to many of the young people who came through the program, each one inspired by his story and eager to create their own path forward. James eventually retired, choosing to spend his days quietly, enjoying the small moments and watching Elijah's accomplishments with pride from afar. He passed peacefully in his sleep one winter evening, having lived a life that had been transformed by love, mentorship, and the bond he had shared with Elijah. In the days following James's passing, Elijah mourned the loss deeply, but he was determined to honor the man who had given him everything. At James's memorial, he spoke with a voice steady and filled with love, recounting the story of the night they had met, of the compassion that had led James to reach out and change his life forever. "My life began the night James found me in that park," Elijah said, his voice choked with emotion. "He taught me that love is not just something we receive. It's something we give, something we build. He gave me the courage to dream, and I can only hope to carry forward the legacy he left behind. I am who I am because of him." Elijah carried on James's legacy with unwavering dedication. Visionary Roots and the Beacon Project continued to grow, reaching more young people, inspiring more lives, and making the world a safer, kinder place. And as Elijah looked back on the life he had built, he knew that James's spirit lived on in every student, every invention, every act of compassion that Visionary Roots inspired. Years later, as Elijah mentored a new generation of young dreamers, he often told them about James, about the night he was found, about the man who had believed in him, and about the legacy of love and kindness that had shaped his life. In this way, James's memory endured, carried forward in the hearts of all those who had been touched by the life he had led, the kindness he had shown, and the family he had built from love. And so, the legacy of James and Elijah continued, a testament to the power of compassion, resilience, and the boundless potential of the human spirit.